Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Yoma Daf Mem Aleph contains one Mishnah which divides the Daf into two sugyas. The first half of the Daf is discussing a statement of Rav Chizda about when somebody brings two karbanos, an ola and a chatas, when can they be designated, one for the ola and one for the chatas, at which time, at which step of his bringing of the karbanos does the designation take hold. It's not really a Yoma Sugya, but the Gemara is going to bring a number of proofs against Rav Chizda, and the first one will be from a recently quoted Gemara that has to do with the Avodah of Yom Kippur. Then when we get to the Mishnah, it'll introduce the next step in the Avodah of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, focusing specifically on the strip of red wool which is tied to the goat. So the Gemara begins with the statement of Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda says that when somebody has to bring two types of karbanos for one issue, such as, for example, a yoledes who has to bring two birds, one of which is a ola, one of which is a chatas, or a metzora, or a zav, also has to bring two birds, one of which is an ola, one of which is a chatas, and brings both birds. So there are only two moments at which they can be designated which one is the ola and which one is the chatas. Number one is when the owner is buying them. If at the time of purchasing the owner specifies this one's the ola, this one's the chatas, that designation takes hold and it cannot be switched. If after the purchase the owner says, okay, now I'm deciding this one's the ola, this one's the chatas, that time cannot be used. That does not take hold. It can still be changed afterwards. The other time that it could actually be designated is by the Kohen. When the Kohen is bringing the carbon, he could say this bird is the ola, this bird is the chatas. That's Rav Chizda's statement. There is the in-between stage between purchasing and actually bringing the carbon. You cannot apply the designation as to which is which. Says the Gemara, what's the source for this? The Gemara says it's the Psukim. The Psukim, when they're discussing the two types of people who have to bring these, when it discusses a yoledis, it says v'lakcha shtei sayim, she has to bring two birds, two either older birds or younger pigeons. One is an ola, one is a chatas. At the time of likicha, at the time of purchasing, one becomes an ola, one becomes a chatas. The pasuk about a metzora says the Kohen should make one into a chatas, one into an ola. So you see, that's either the purchasing of the owner or the performing of the avodah by the Kohen. That is of Chiz's halacha. The Gemara's number of kashas on him. First kashas from a recent quoted Gemara that we saw. The Gemara wanted to bring a kal v'chomer from those birds, from when you designate one as ola, one as a chatas, from there to the two goats of Yom Kippur, which one is going to go la'azazel and which one is going to go for the carbon chatas. So the Gemara says that, look at it this way: the birds, you can designate one as an ola, one as a chatas, and a gorel does not work. A gorel does not work, but verbally designating one does work. So in the case of the karbanos on Yom Kippur, where a gorel drawing lots does work, certainly a verbal designation should work. So Gemara says, hold on a second. Let's analyze this. You're telling me that instead of the Kohen doing a gorel, he should be able to do a verbal designation. The Brisa, which brings this kal v'chomer, ends up rejecting it. But the claim at this point is that we see from the birds that a verbal designation is stronger than a gorel, because by the birds the gorel doesn't work, but the verbal designation works. So by the Yom Kippur avodah where the gorel works, the verbal designation should for sure work. But what step is this? This is not purchasing, and this is not performing by the Kohen. This is an in-between step. According to Rav Chizda, an in-between step can't work. So how could a verbal designation, what is it said that a verbal designation possibly works here? So Gemara answers, and Gemara says, no, we didn't mean to say that it works at this time that we're doing the gyro. We meant to say that it should work at the time of the purchasing. We meant to say that a verbal designation should work at the time of purchasing of the two goats for Yom Kippur, and the kal v'chomer would run as follows. In the case of the birds, where a gyro does not work, a verbal designation at the time of purchasing does work, so you see that a verbal designation at the time of purchasing has stronger designation powers than a gyro. So therefore, in the case of the two goats of Yom Kippur, where the gyro works in whatever time it is, certainly a verbal designation at the time of purchasing should work. So we should say, not at the time of the gyro, at the time of purchasing. That's the proof that we wanted to bring. Okay, so therefore there's no kasha on Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda will say, well, we were only trying to prove a verbal designation at the time of purchasing. Now the Gemara has another kasha on Rav Chizda, and this is not going to be Yoma related anymore, not Yom Kippur related. This is from a Brisa. The Brisa says that somebody who comes into the Beis Hamikdash when he's tamei has to bring a carbon. What carbon does he bring? Depends. If he's poor, he has to bring two birds, one's a chatas, one's an ola. If he's a little richer than that, if he's richer, then he has to bring one animal chatas. So now what happens like this? Somebody was poor, and he's metame. He comes into the Beis Hamikdash when he's tamei. So it's chayav to bring two birds, one's an ola, one's a chatas, and he sets aside money to buy those two karbanos. Then he gets rich. And then he goes and he buys his two karbanos that he was supposed to bring when he was poor. He buys he sets aside, the Gemara says, he doesn't buy, he designates. He says, here's a pile of money that's going to be for the chatas, and here's a pile of money that's going to be for the ola. So now, he's not supposed to bring a chatas and ola anymore. He's now rich. He's supposed to bring an animal chatas. So the Brisa here says he could take the pile of money that he set aside to be the chatas bird. Since it's chatas money, he could use that to add a little bit money that he could get up to the price of a chatas animal, and he could use that chatas bird money to buy a chatas animal. However, the pile of money that he set aside to be an ola, he can't use that for anything. So that can't be converted. He doesn't need a ola now. Now he has to bring a carbon behema of a rich person. There's only a chatas, there's no ola. So Gemara says, so let's analyze this. What's happening? That means that we say that the designation took effect. That when he said this pile of money is going to be for the chatas, this pile of money is going to be for the ola, the chatas is designated as a chatas. He can only use the chatas to buy his new chatas animal that he needs now. He can't use the ola because the designation as an ola takes effect. How does it fit Rav Chisda? According to Rav Chisda, should only be at the time that you actually set the money aside. At the time that you set the money, you said, this is my money that I'm going to use for the karbanos. At that time, you could designate what coins are for ola, what coins are for chatas. That's like buying the birds. But if you already set aside the money to be used, and you want to specify what's the ola, what's the chatas, it's too late for that. It shouldn't work. That's the Gemara's kasha on Rav Chisda. So the Gemara says, hold on a second. This price doesn't make sense anyway. And since you have to change it because it doesn't make sense, there must be a mistake, we'll change it so that it fits with Rav Chisda as well. Why doesn't it make sense? Because it says that the person became rich and then he designated one as a bird, one pile for the ola, one pile for the chatas. If he became rich, he's not a chayiv in ola and a chatas anymore. He's only chayiv in an animal chatas. He's now a rich man. How could he designate a carbon he doesn't need? How could it take effect? Obviously it's a mistake. Obviously what it means to say is that he designated it one as a bird, one pile of money as a chatas, and one as an ola. He made that designation before he became rich, and then afterwards he became rich. And now the Mishnah is saying, the Brisa is saying he can only use the chatas money. So once you're changing it, so you could just say that at the time he set the money aside to be used for karbanos, at that time he designated, just make that change as well. Say that it wasn't that he first set it aside, and then he came back to it and said, okay, this piece is going to be for the chatas, this piece for the ola. At the time of the designation of the money to be used for his karbanos, right then he said, I'm going to use this money for the chatas, this money for the ola. And that solves all the problems. Mar says that's great, but it only works according to Rav Elazar ben Rav Hishya, because we're about to see there's a machlokes between Rav Elazar ben Rav Hishya and Rav Yeshaya and Rav Chaga ben Rav Yeshaya. Somebody who's chayiv in a rich man's carbon and he sets aside a poor man's carbon, does it take effect or not? Does it work? According to Rav Chaga in the name of Rav Yeshaya, it does work. So according to him, you don't have to change anything in this Mishnah. Even though he's now a rich man and he sets aside a carbon as a poor man, it still takes effect. You have no kasha in the Mishnah, therefore you can't change anything. So your answer doesn't work. So the Gemara says, okay, I have to give you a different answer. And the Gemara gives another answer, rejects it, and then gives a third answer. The Gemara first of all says, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to add a word into the Mishnah. When the Mishnah says that he designates some of the money for the ola and some of the chatas, it says va'omar, he designates it. So instead of saying va'omar and he designates verbally, he said we should say v'lakach va'omar. He takes the money, he actually buys the ana, he actually buys the bird. And he says at the time of buying that this one is the ola, this one's a chatas. That fits perfectly with Rav Chisda. All we have to do is stick in the word v'lakach. Rashi says you often find words missing from a brisa. It's not the end of the world. You could do that even if you have no other indication that there's a problem here in the brisa. Stick in the word v'lakach. He takes the money, he buys, and he designates. It fits with Rav Chisda. He's making this designation at the time of purchasing. The Gemara says he buys and he designates. What are you talking about? That can't be shot in the brisa. The brisa then goes on and it says that you could take the money and add to it and use that for your carbon. So how can you tell me that he bought the bird already? It's obviously still money because he's adding money to it and he's using it. You can add money to a bird and use that to buy a chatas animal. So Gemara says no, why not? He bought the bird. What's he going to do then? He's going to exchange it back to money. He'll redeem it. He'll transfer the kedusha from that bird back onto money, and then he'll go take that money and buy the animal chatas that is chayv. The Gemara says, "Hashem Yirachim." Don't you know there's a Mefarshim Gemara in Menachos that says you cannot redeem a bird? Redemption of Karbanis only works on animals, doesn't work on birds, so you can't be redeeming it. Someone says, okay, so that's not the pshat. The pshat is something else. Here's what actually happened. He didn't buy a bird. He took the pile of money. Not that he bought an ola and a chatas. He took the pile of money and he bought one of the two. And then that one became designated as a bird because he verbally designated and he said, I'm buying this bird to be either a ola or chatas, whichever it was. And the rest of the money automatically became designated for the other type of carbon that a poor man is chayiv in. And that's what the Brisa is referring to. And therefore you read the Brisa as follows. He set aside a pile of money. And then he took he became rich. And then he goes ahead and he now takes some of that money and he buys a bird. So like we're holding like Rav Chaga that he's allowed to do that even though he's rich now. He takes it and he buys a bird. Now if he says that this bird is chatas, he designates it verbally at the time of purchasing as chatas, which fits in Rav Chizda. So then the bird is now the chatas, the leftover money is an ola. Leftover money is an ola, he cannot take that money and use it to buy his chatas behema, his chatas animal that he's chayiv in. He can't do that, it's not an ola. However, if he bought an ola, so then what he could do is that the money that's left over is now chatas money. He could take the leftover chatas money and he could use that now, add a little bit money to that. Again, the leftover money is a chatas. He could therefore use that money, add money to it, and buy the chatas behema that he's chayiv in. Now, what happens to the bird that he's not going to use? So if it's an ola, the Gemara says the halacha is that it goes linadava. It goes as a voluntary carbon. You're allowed to bring an ola whenever you want, as an olas nadava. If it's a chatas, you can't. You can't volunteer a chatas. A chatas that doesn't serve a purpose the halacha is misa. It has to go lemisa. It has to die. You just have to leave it locked in a room without food. There's nothing you can do with it. Okay, now the Gemara goes to analyze this machlokas between Rav Elazar in the name of Rav Yeshaya and Rav Chaga in the name of Rav Yeshaya, who we saw that argue about whether or not you're allowed to be to set aside karbanos that you're not chayvin. If you are a rich man and you set aside karbanos for a poor man, the karbanos that a poor man needs, is that chal, does that count or not? So the Gemara I had quoted earlier, the Rav Elazar in the name of Rav Yeshaya says that somebody who's tamei goes to the Beis HaMikdash and he's rich and he goes and he sets aside a carbon ani and he brings it, he's not yaitza. Rav Chaga says he is yaitza. So Mar's kasha. Mar's kasha is from a mitzayra. Mitzayra also has different karbanos for a poor person, for a rich person. We have a brisa that clearly says that a mitzayra, if he's poor and he brings a rich man's carbon, is yaitza. If he's rich, he brings a poor man's carbon, he's not yaitza. The Gemara assumes the same thing should be by somebody who's tamei and goes into the Beis HaMikdash. If he's rich and he brings a poor man's carbon, he should not be yaitza. Kasha and Rav Chaga. So Gemara says, no, the halacha is different. Mitzayra has a special halacha because there's a special rule. There over there it says zois. The pasuk says zois tiyateres ha-mitzayra. This you have to bring. You cannot bring a different type. You have to bring the one that's befitting for you. You don't have a pasuk like that in the case of a person who went into the Beis HaMikdash when he was tamei. So the Gemara says, well, hold on a second. If you're telling me that by mitzvah it says zois, you're not allowed to change, so how come a poor man's yaitz if he brings a rich man's carbon? Well, that's also a violation of zois. The Gemara says, okay, but there's a different pasuk that says that works. What's that? It says toiras. Zois tia toiras ha-mitzvah. That includes that there's all different types of things work because it's all the Torah, all part of the Torah's mitzvah. So Gemara says, so we end up having two drushes. Zois limits what you're allowed to do. Toiras includes more things. So we say that we take a middle ground. A poor person who uses a rich man's carbon is yaitza. A rich man who uses a poor man's carbon is not yaitza. So Gemara says, okay. So if you're learning it from Sukkim, so then you should learn from there to the case of a person who has to bring a carbon for going to the Beis HaMikdash when he's a tamei. You should apply those halachas. Gemara says, no, because the pasuk there says v'imdal hu. It limits this halacha of mitzvah to who. It's only in the case of the mitzvah that we have these halachos. It's limited to there and does not apply to the karbanos, other types of karbanos that are different for a poor and a rich man. Okay, we now move on to the next Mishnah. The Mishnah says the next step that happens. And the Mishnah describes as follows. The Kohen would take a strip of red wool and he would tie it on the goat that is going La'azazel. Next, he would take the goat and he would stand it next to the gate that he was going to go out of. Then the Mishnah says, he would take the goat that's supposed to be slaughtered and he would put it next to the place of its shechita. The Gemara will analyze what this means exactly. The Kohen Gadol's step further would be he would go back to his cow, his par, and he would do video on it again. He would lean his two hands on its head, he would do smicha, and then he would do video, and this is the video that he would do, this time for him and for all of Kohanim, and he would say, Ana Hashem, Avisi Pashati Chotasi, Lefanecha Ani Uvesi. We did sins in ascending levels of severity. Me and my family, Ubnei Aaron Am Kidushecha, and all the family of Aaron, all the Kohanim, Ana Hashem, Kapana Lavonis V'Lapshayim V'Lachatoyim, Shavisi V'Shapashati V'Shechatasi, Lefanecha Ani Uvesi, Ubnei Aaron Am Kidushecha, Kakazav B'Saras Moshe Avdecha, Kiveim Azei Chapar Leichem, L'Tayar Eschem, Mikol Chatoy Seichem, Lefnei Hashem Titaru. And everybody heard him pronounce the shame, they would say Baruch Shem Kohen Machos Leilam Ved. Okay, now the Gemara moves on. First, the Gemara is going to analyze exactly how you read the Mishnah, and then it's going to go discuss further how the strip of red wool worked exactly. So the Mishnah had said 2 steps. It said, first of all, you tie the strip of wool on the Azazel goat, and you stand the Azazel goat. Then it said, and the slaughtered one you do by the Beis Hashchita, by the place of slaughtering. The Gemara says, what you do? What's that referring to when you say the slaughtered one you do by the place of slaughtering? That's referring to the tying, that you also tie a red strip by the place of slaughtering on the goat, meaning you tie a red strip around its neck, was referring to the standing of the goat, and it's saying you also stand up the other goat that's going to be slaughtered in the place that's meant to be slaughtered, and there is no red strip that goes on the goat that's meant to be slaughtered. What are we referring to when you say that you do it to the slaughtered goat in the place of slaughtering? What are we talking about? The difference between the two, obviously, is that if we're referring to the tying, then the slaughtered goat got a red strip around its neck. If we're referring to the standing, then the slaughtered goat did not get any red strip at all. So Gemara says, I'll bring you a proof. And the proof is that we have a brayso that quotes this procedure, and it continues, and it says that the point of this is that these 2 goats should not get confused with each other or with any other goat. Now, obviously, then, that means that it had a red strip around its neck. That would keep it from being confused with the other one, because one has a red strip around its horns. The first, again, the goat that goes Azazel had its red strip tied around its horns, and this one has a red strip tied around its neck. And all the other goats don't have a red strip, so nothing will get confused. If, however, the goat that's going to be slaughtered didn't get a red strip, then it could easily be confused with other goats. It wouldn't be confused with the one that has a red strip in its horns, but it'd be confused with other goats. It's not accomplishing that it shouldn't be confused with other goats, and therefore the brayso wouldn't make sense. So it's got to be that we're referring to the fact that you tie the red strip on it around its neck. Okay, now the Gemara discusses the red strip more in detail, and the Gemara, there's 2 versions of this. Gemara only going to get to the first one on this stuff. The Gemara says that in halacha you find the red strip twice. You find one by the goat which is going Lazazel, and you find another one by the paraduma. The paraduma, you had to take a strip of red wool and tie it together with a bit of azev grass and a bit of cedar. So the Gemara says that Rav Yitzchak says, I heard about these 2 red strips, and I heard that one of them has a minimum size and the other one does not have a minimum size. I don't know which one is which. So Gemara says that Rav Yosef said it's logical that the one that went on the goat to go to Azazel, that had to have a minimum size. Why? Because there's a need for a size. What's need? You have to split it into 2. That red strip was split into 2. One was tied around the horns, and then before it was sent over the cliff, a piece was torn off and it was tied around the rock. So you see that there is a minimum size, it has to be divided. So obviously that must be the one that has a minimum size. The Gemara has a kasha. The Gemara says, first of all, there is a need for a certain amount of size for the red strip of the paraduma as well. Why? So the Gemara gives 2 reasons. The Gemara, first of all, says it had to have a certain weight. We know that the halach is that when it was thrown into the fire that burned the paraduma, it says v'hishlech el toich sreifas. The par has to be thrown deep in, el toich, deep into the fire. It has to go in. It can't just float at the top. So it has to have weight to it so that it should fall in. So the Gemara says, that's not a problem. That's a machlekes tanaim whether or not that's true. So maybe we're referring to the Tana that doesn't hold away. So the Gemara says, okay, but you do have to divide it because we have a statement, a brayso, that says that he would take the leftovers of the strip and he would use it to tie together the eitz eres and the azov, the grasses and the cedar. So Gemara says, it doesn't mean leftovers. It means that it would be a piece of the strip. You would have to, the strip, it wasn't a set strip, it was a lump of wool. And then you would comb it into like a strip, into a tail, into a zanov. That's what it means. And then you would use that part, and then that piece that you would smooth out, comb out to a long strip, that's what you would use to tie together the other ingredients. Okay, so Gemara is fine. Now the Gemara discusses more in particular the halacha of the fact that the red strip had to fall deep into the fire. Zimur quotes Rav that says that if it doesn't fall into the fire, if it gets burned by a flame while it's floating in the air, while it's just in the beginning, it's kosher, it works anyway. The Gemara quotes a brayso that says that it's not kosher. Contradiction. The Gemara says it depends how the flame was exactly. If a flame shot up, standing out of the fire, and was really up and out, that's no good. That's not called el taich. If, however, it was burned by a flame, it didn't actually hit the embers, it was burned by a flame, but deep in the heart of the fire, that is called el taich, and that works. Okay, now the Gemara discusses this machlokes tanaim that we had said there was, as to whether or not it needs to have weight. So the Gemara quotes a machlokes. The Gemara says, the Gemara has a brayso. The brayso says, what is the reason that you wrap the red strip around the other ingredients, the aziv and the eitz erez? Gemara has a machlokes. According to Rebbe, it's so that they should all be tied together and held together, not spread out. According to Rabbi Shimon, it's in order that it should have weight and fall in, and therefore you see that he holds that it has to have.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.